the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. As we get closer to the November election, it's becoming clear that religion is playing a role in the election, in how people vote and how the candidates are defining their message. Lots of pieces in the press on it. The Washington Post has a piece by the very distinguished columnist E.J. Dionne, who argues that this election is a struggle for the soul of American Christianity, if indeed it does have a soul. Others suggest that actually the two candidates, Harris and Trump, have actually gone light on religion, that they're sidestepping it. Some people believe indeed that Kamala Harris should be more aggressive or more vocal in her faith and in her identity. Everyone's watching this, even the foreign press. There was an interesting piece on Sky News, the British broadcaster, about how religious beliefs are changing in the US and how it impact the election. One man who's all too familiar with this is my guest today. Jim Wallis is the founder of Sojourners. He's a very distinguished writer, best-selling writer. He teaches at Georgetown University, author of many best-selling books. And he has a new book out. It's called The False White Gospel, Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming True Faith, and Refounding Democracy. Jim is on book tour, kind of book election tour. He's in Omaha, Nebraska. Jim, what's your take on whether or not this election, to borrow some language from E.J. Dionne, is a struggle for the soul of American Christianity?
Well, EJ is a good friend, and he called me up and said, I'm going to North Carolina to write this column. And I told him who he should be talking to. I was just there. And all over North Carolina, rural and urban, we had great gatherings of people. And I said to them, I said, you're in play politically. And they all smiled. And I would say, is faith in play in North Carolina? How do you put faith in play? And that's what I'm trying to raise, the faith factor, as you just named that to this election. White Christian nationalism has become a huge faith factor. But now there's a movement afoot, and I see North Carolina, Arizona, all the places I go, where diverse Christians and people of other faith traditions are really confronting white Christian nationalism as a false religion that's supporting Donald Trump, and saying the alternative is for us, what Jesus said and taught is deeply antithetical to white Christian nationalism. So this book is about white Christian nationalism. It's also about 6 iconic biblical texts.
We'll get to the book in a minute, Jim. Not everyone might agree with you about something you call white Christian nationalism. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, good question. The name, Andrew, spells the problem. You take the most inclusive, welcoming, inviting vision, I think, in the world, and you make it white. This is not new. It's old. Dominionist theology goes back before our founding. And then you say Christian, but they don't mean service or sacrifice. They mean control, dominion. And this goes way back to papal bulls telling white Europeans, white Anglo-Saxons, that the land belonged to them so they can displace and nearly destroy an indigenous population, but enslave an African population. And then nationalist. I mean, Jesus' last instruction to his followers was go into all the world, making disciples in every nation, teaching them to observe whatever I've commanded you. every nation. So this idea of putting America first, uh, Trump's Bible, God bless the USA, that in biblical language is an idol. It's an idolatry. It's a worship of a nation instead of the way of Jesus, which is so different than what they're saying and doing.
Jim, the last time I checked, I'm not a constitutional expert, but I always thought that the American Republic was rooted in a distinction between church and state. So why do we need all this Christian language, whether it's the bad Christianity, which you at least claim to identify in the false white gospel, or the good Christianity, the generous Christianity that you claim to represent? Why should this play a role in a political election, which shouldn't be about religion?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't in the UK. My wife is a Brit, one of the first women ordained in the Church of England 30 years ago. And so it doesn't play a role there. I'm back there all the time. But no, I believe, just for the record, I believe in the separation of church and state. That doesn't require the segregation of moral and religious values from public life. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. raised his faith. The Black church was at the heart of the civil rights movement, the infrastructure, the foundation. So, how you bring faith to public life is the question. And those of us who believe we live in a pluralistic democracy where every faith and people of no faith at all get equal treatment, that's important to say. Bring your faith, your values. If they're defined by faith, fine. If not by something else, fine. Bring your values into public life, but don't try to coerce your religion to fundamentalism in all our traditions, Christian, Jewish, Islam, is the use of religion for power, to gain power. And that's what this new and old
Jim,
Christian nationalism is.
we've done lots of shows on this. Ann Nelson, Pete Wayner. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of
Yeah, I know them both.
the DC area. What has happened to American Christianity, at least in your view? Has it become racialized? How and why? And who's behind all this?
Well, it's become politicized. I just had Elizabeth Newman at Georgetown. We had a big summit on faith and democracy. She wrote a book called The Kingdom of Rage, which she's interesting because she's a counterterrorism expert, an expert on extremism, and she's from the Southern Bible Belt. And she's talking about how domestic terrorism is on the rise. More and more people are thinking violence might be necessary. And a lot of the extremism comes from the evangelical background that she and I are both from. So I had a faith table conference call this week, 2 days ago, with a lot of faith leaders and her. And the danger is rising. But again, this is not new. The issue that people are afraid of is that we are closer to a multiracial democracy than we have ever been before. And that's why a whole lot of fearful, angry white people are rising up. And this is a last battle for them. And that's the issue. White supremacy is embedded in this, what I call America's original sin, the racial hierarchy, since our founding. And so we've been battling that ever since, and more people in this country get to be part of it, get to vote, get to be a part of the kind of nation we want to be. But there's a backlash. And Donald Trump, if you listen to him, his lies are always about immigrants of color or people of color, like in Springfield, that Haitian immigrants are stealing and eating dogs and cats. That story hasn't gone away for 3 weeks, as they normally do. But the lies continue and continue. And so the lies are racial lies, if you listen carefully.
Jim, aren't you racializing this? I mean, if Trump was on the show, I don't suppose he'd come on my show, but if he was, he would argue in his own way. He's not a racist. He would suggest that quite a significant proportion of Latino people voting for him, that young black men are attracted, and that you're the one racializing this. You're suggesting that any white Christian who votes for, and correct me if I'm wrong, but any white Christian who votes for Trump is, what, a defender of slavery, a racist, and they might simply like the guy. Where's the evidence that all these Trump voters are racist?
Well, that's the language I would never use, Andrew. Never say that about people who vote for Trump. I'm saying he is using and catalyzing racism, creating fear. He's lying about Haitian immigrants in Springfield. He's time and time again, when he came down his elevator steps at Trump Tower, he was attacking immigrants. His first foray into politics was attacking the legitimacy of a black president, Barack Obama, saying his birth certificate wasn't legitimate. His whole career calling for a death sentence for young men in Central Park who were not guilty of a crime, his renting of his apartment. So Donald Trump has always, always, always used racism and fear. Now, a lot of people are afraid in this country, but the fear can lead to hate, can lead to violence. And that's what Trump is doing. He's a master of grievance. But I would say every nation has its better angels and its worst demons. And our demons of race run very deep in America. It is America's original sin. And we're still repenting from that sin. But repentance doesn't mean feeling guilty or sorry. It means turning around. The word means turn around and go in a whole different direction.
Yeah,
So
Jim,
I
I take your point. I mean, clearly there are some young men, the Charlottesville demonstration, for example, running around with Nazi flags. These people are self-evidently and unembarrassedly racist. But what's your take on the typical Trump voter? You're in Omaha, Nebraska now. Nebraska will vote for Trump. You're doing a Midwestern tour, so you probably come across a lot of Trump voters. Are many of them racist, or is this somehow implicit in the reason why they would vote for a man? Because as you suggested, he doesn't hide his opinion of Haitian immigrants. He, in fact, shows it off. So for people who are voting for Trump, are they racist, especially Christians?
Well, again, language of calling people racist is something I deal with the first day in my class at Georgetown, Faith, Race, and Politics. What I say is, don't point fingers at others and say, you're a racist or I'm not a racist. I have black friends. Race is America's story from our founding, from our beginning. It's America's story. So their first paper, my students do this next week, is what's your story, your family story in relationship to this American story of race. The uniqueness of British and American slavery was the racial hierarchy. And that's embedded in all of this. And so there's a fear of being replaced by 2040 will no longer be a white majority nation. Will be
it sounds to me as in your own slightly roundabout way, Jim, you're suggesting that maybe the word isn't racist, but the reason they're voting, or many people are voting for Trump, is because of race. Is that fair?
No, what I'm saying is that what he keeps saying all the time, he invents, what they're talking about is lies about immigrants of color. He says immigrants from Norway are fine for him, but not immigrants of color. And so he's saying that over and over again, and he's appealing to a fear that people have of being replaced, of being majority of minorities in this country. That's core. So if it wasn't, and that is from Trump and Vance, that is a systemic racism. Now people are voting for Trump for all kinds of reasons. They see him as an outsider. They're against what they see are the elites and the coastal elites. They're feeling a grind economically, and they somehow think he'll do better for them. They'd say many things, and I've talked to lots of people. but they are isolationists. They don't want to deal with Ukraine. There's many things they'd say, but I'm saying underneath it, there is a fear that Trump is trying to catalyze that white people are being replaced in America by people of color. And what we're saying and what Jesus says, what our gospel says, is this has got to be a place, a land for all of us. All of us are, we're training poll chaplains to go into perilous polling places in battleground states to be prepared for calming things, being a presence, clergy with collars, along with lawyers and collars. And we're trying to say, let's de-escalate this fear and find a way we can faithfully live together. We lack a proximity to each other, and proximity, relationship is what changes us. So I'm here with these churches in Omaha, and I'm saying churches should be places, congregations where people learn meaning and belonging and feel welcome. And so the fear of not knowing each other, believing caricatures of each other, and being turned against one another, that is the heart of the Trump campaign. There's no doubt.
Aren't you doing exactly what he's doing, or what some of his supporters are doing? You're politicizing your religion. You mentioned Jesus. He certainly had nothing to do with the establishment of the American Republic. He may or may not have existed many, many centuries ago. Why? What does Jesus have to do with the 2024 election in the United States?
A good bit. For example, I'm going to preach tomorrow at this church on the Good Samaritan parable, one that many people know. And here's a lawyer has a question for Jesus. And I've studied this text, and I think, Andrew, it's a Washington lawyer. I can tell by the tone of voice. And he says, "What do I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus says, "I think you know. You love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." That's the summation of all of our religious traditions. And then he says, okay, well, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor is the most important question in this election. And then he lifts up a Samaritan. Now, the Judean society in which Jesus was teaching didn't believe there were any good Samaritans. They were mixed race. They were called half-breed, dangerous, false worshipers. The Samaritans were the ones who were othered, like we see people othered today. And so it's an amazing story because one who's other helps a Jewish man. All the scholars say it was a Jewish man by the side of the road who's other to him. And so it means you got to love your neighbor who's different than you are. That's the core of that story. So is Jesus relevant to that? He sure is, because we're afraid of neighbors who aren't like us. And we have politics trying to make us afraid. Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself, and especially that neighbor who's different than you. So Jesus is very relevant here to the most important question in this campaign is, who is my neighbor?
Well, Jim, what would you make of the founding fathers' understanding of politics, particularly Madison, who suggested that we naturally form into faction. We don't love our neighbors. I can't quite remember whether he thought of religion as faction too. It's probably a complicated business with Madison. But the government was set up not to make us love one another, but to simply make sure that no one faction ever controlled the entire government.
Well, is John
sorry, let me finish your question on the founding fathers. I mean, Madison was, of course, a Christian, but his Christian doctrine didn't define the secular foundations of the American Republic, did it?
No, what I said a few moments ago, I believe in the separation of church and state. But John Meacham, today a historian who's good on all these things, says democracy depends on not turning your neighbors into enemies. Your neighbors are people you can disagree with, be different from, but you treat them as neighbors in a democracy, people that you have civil relationship to. You can disagree and should disagree on all kinds of policy questions, but turning neighbors into feared enemies is a dangerous thing. And I think that's been true for since the founding. And we've tried again and again to try to make sure we include more people in this democracy. They didn't include many people at the founding of our democracy, just white men with property, like a guy like me who owns a house. And now, over a lot of struggle, we've included men without property and women. And not till 1965 did we include Black Americans in this democracy. And now there's a fight back against that ever since. So this is really a battle for what kind of nation we're going to be, who belongs in this nation, and who we treat as neighbors civilly and respectfully, even in our disagreements, and not turn our neighbors who we live with and around into our enemies that we're told to fear and to hate. And as Elizabeth Newman, who I just cited, the increase in the number of Americans who are willing to use violence to gain their political ends. That's what I see happening in this political campaign, and that's a very dangerous thing.
Jim, the subtitle of the new book, The False White
Yeah.
Gospel, is Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming True Faith, and Refounding Democracy. Do you believe that to what you call refound democracy, whatever that means, requires the reclamation of true faith? What happens if you're a skeptic like myself, and even the notion of true faith is in itself problematic?
Oh, for sure. And as I always say, this nation is not just for people of Christian faith or any faith, or it's for people of no faith at all, skeptics and people who are unsure at all. Most of my students at Georgetown would check the box for religious affiliation, the none of the above category, the nuns, none of the above. And that's the students I work with all the time.
N-O-N-E rather than N-U-N.
N-O-N-E. Yeah, well, I love the other nuns too at Georgetown.
We all do.
But no, it's N-O-N-E-S, the nuns. And to me, they're emblematic of what's happening in this country. And most of them believe in God or something larger than themselves, but they don't affiliate with religion because of what religion is saying or not saying, doing and not doing. And so this election is genuinely a test of democracy. We have a candidate who is not willing to accept even the results of elections or the peaceful transfer of power. This is fundamental. Liz Cheney came out against Trump this week because she believes in the Constitution. So Republicans and Democrats. In Atlanta, I moderated a panel, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, different in all kinds of ways, but afraid of democracy, that we're losing democracy. I'm saying it's a test of faith as well, about the integrity of faith, and it's a test for a new generation. A new generation is watching what we do and say, and they're not going to go near a church if, in fact, religion is used to bring an end to democracy as we know it.
Does it really matter, though, Jim, if whoever wins this election? It's what's for sure, as we talk today in October 2024, that it's going to be a really close thing, that it'll be determined by a few 100,000, maybe 1 million votes in a few key states. So what that suggests is that America is deeply split, whoever wins the election. So whether or not Harris or Trump wins, it's not really going to change anything in terms of your thesis in the false white gospel, is it? You still got these dark forces you believe of racism. You've still got all this anger. Why would anything change, even if Harris wins the election?
Andrew, we had a president who tried to prevent, who lost the last election, who tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. January 6th was a mob attacking our Capitol that he invited and incited. We haven't had that before. That's new. That's different. That's why Liz Cheney has come out as strongly as she has, differing in policy issues from Kamala Harris. And that's a good thing. We need healthy political debate, different parties. But we have someone who is committed against democracy. That's critical. That's new. That's something we haven't seen before. Our founders were afraid of demagogues like Donald Trump rising up and, in fact, undermining.
No, I take your point. You don't need to convince me of this. But my question, I'm not sure if you quite understand my question. So let's say we talk again in mid-November and Harris has won the election by few electoral votes, few 100,000 votes. Will that really, Jim, I take your point on Trump if he comes to power, but even if Harris wins, why should it change anything? You've still got a very significant proportion of Americans who voted for a candidate who, as you suggested, is unashamedly racist, who speaks with remarkably violent hostility towards immigrants. Why should anything change?
Well, Kamala Harris would accept the results of the election, where Trump would not. And I have a real fear of violence, even if he loses.
No, I take your point, but my question:
how much changes? That's up to us. And Eddie Glaude, who wrote the foreword to my book, wonderful author himself, says everything is falling apart, and everything is possible at the same time. So electing Kamala Harris won't solve all of our problems. It's a framework in which we can organize, that we can deal with. And for me, the text that is most important to my politics, the politics of Jesus, if you will, is Matthew 25, where Jesus says, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked, I was sick, I was a stranger. The word means immigrant. I was in prison. And how you treat the least of these is how you treat me. That economics of Jesus turns our politics upside down for both parties. I fight both parties about the priority of the poor and the marginalized who get left out again and again. And I'm terribly afraid. I think most white middle class people, their lives might go on just fine if Trump wins. In fact, the tax cuts will help rich people on the left. There's a lot of rich people on the left. I'm talking about the marginalized, the people who are on the edges, on the bottom, who are already poor and vulnerable. The Bible holds princes and rulers and kings responsible, not for their gross national product or their military firepower or their popular culture being the envy of the world. It holds them responsible for how the poor and vulnerable are doing. To me, that's the heart of the politics of Jesus, to raise those people up. And Donald Trump will be so destructive to those people. And Kamala Harris or any Democrat has got to do better by all those people. But for a lot of us, those people on the bottom, on the edges, are the most important to us if we say that we're followers of Jesus.
So what should she do? We've done lots of shows on this. We've got an upcoming show with Arlie Hothschild, who is, like you, very much a student of America and of bringing people back together. Given that Christian nationalism is not a small group of Americans, given that it's reasonably strong within the evangelical community, you mentioned Better Angels earlier. I'm sure you're familiar with the Better Angels group. I've been to some of their events. How should men like you, men of faith, reach out to Christian nationalists? Or is it impossible? Have you written them off?
No, that's a great question. I don't think it's impossible. In fact, every movement has to decide who they must persuade and also who they have to defeat. Defeat non-violently, but at the ballot box. I didn't write this book if I wouldn't have written it if I didn't think there were persuadable people. And after the election's over, there's still going to be a whole lot of people who are stuck in what I call this false white gospel of Christian nationalism.
They're going to be really annoyed by that, though. I know a lot of them, Jim. They're going to say, "Who's this guy to tell me that my vote for Trump is a manifestation of racism?"
Well, but this is where the book spends most time in these texts, these iconic biblical texts. And so I said yesterday to the crowd of people here, go to the text, go to the text. Don't just try to persuade people to watch MSNBC. That's not going to work. You've got to go to the text. What do we have in common? What do we see Jesus saying and doing? And what does that mean? It's going to be a conversation, a real dialogue, a real rigorous one going forward. It's not going to be solved by an election. And if we, in fact, just save democracy, that's not enough. We have to transform democracy. So there's a whole lot of people in this country, a lot of young people of color who don't think democracy is working for them. And in many ways, it's not. So how do we change things? And the interesting thing is now, Trump could set us back a long time. But if Trump loses, we have a chance to be more transformational than I think we've been in a long time. I don't want to go back to democracy as usual under Biden or under my friend Barack Obama. We need something better and different and more impactful in people's lives. So I think we have a chance to change a lot of things. But if we lose democracy, we're going to have a deep struggle on our hands. And I don't think people understand what's at stake in this election.
Explain this a bit more, Jim. This is, you work with Obama. You said that you just earlier said that we need to, Americans need to improve whatever you mean by democracy, make it better than under Obama and Biden. How and why? What does this involve? More state, larger taxes, more rah-rah, forced meetings? I don't understand what you mean.
Well, no, it's not more state. It's about, I'm going to go back to what I said a moment ago. The test for me of a society or a democracy is how the poorest and most vulnerable are doing. And they're still not doing well. So how do we change that? And that's a combination of not just government, but civil society, the private sector. It means all of us coming together and making. My chair at Georgetown is called the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Chair, my teacher, hero, tutor in South Africa, of faith and justice. Faith and justice are inseparable in my mind. So what does it mean to push for justice in deeper ways than we have before? And that includes all of us in that. It's very simple. And I think it can't be done by just slogans or rhetoric or one ideology or another. But there are practical things, like we had after COVID, a Recovery Act that had child tax credits that reduced child poverty by almost half. That worked, effective, and yet it hasn't been renewed by the Congress. So practical things like that for family help are necessary.
Jim, so it sounds to me from what you're saying that
what's that?
With your focus on the underprivileged, that you are essentially what, at least in Europe, would be called a Christian socialist, for better or worse. Is that a term that you would be comfortable with?
No, that's a term that is not an American term. It wouldn't work here. It's not a matter of, again, I'm not going to lay out a different economic system. I want our systems to work for those who they're not working for now, who are on the edges. And so, in Europe, some of those battles are still going on. In Europe, as you know well, right-wing movements are based on fear of immigration, of immigrants coming, immigrants of color from North Africa and the Middle East. You've got right-wing movements making headway in Europe because of the same thing. Fear of people of color coming into otherwise Scandinavia is very progressive, they think. And yet they're very nervous about refugees and immigrants coming. So this is a global problem. And how do we really have a view of the world that really includes all of us and really makes a space for all of us to belong, no matter what race, no matter what religion, skeptic or religion, doesn't matter. It's space. It's a place in space where all of us are safe and secure and can thrive and can move our lives and our children's
I
lives
don't think
forward.
anyone. I mean, that sounds like a sort of an apple pie description. I saw a
No, no,
piece
no.
from
It's not apple pie. It's how can we make things better than
right. I
they
saw a piece from you. You published about a Christian movement to welcome a stranger on immigration.
are.
Is your thinking? It sounds to me, Jim, in the way you're presenting this, would be almost an argument in favor of open borders. I mean, I'm no great fan of Trump or of Vance or their attitude towards migrants, but their argument would be that they're not against legal immigrants, they're against illegal immigrants. Is, in your view, the Christian responsibility or your responsibility to embrace a migrant, whether or not they're legally in this country?
The Haitian immigrants in Springfield are legal.
No, I understand that, but in terms
And
of
no, immigration is a very complicated issue I worked on for a long time with Republicans and Democrats. Both parties have failed. It's a broken system. We need a much more humane, legal, accessible, compassionate system. I don't know anyone who really believes in open borders. I don't. But how you treat the stranger, how you welcome the stranger, means you got to have an immigration system that works, that allows for borders and citizenship and a legal access to this country. But they're not saying they're for legal immigrants. I mean, you have a whole lot of people, as you know, people who came here as little kids and they entered illegally, and now they're called the dreamers. They live here. They've gone to college here. They've been in the military here. They've lived here their whole lives, and so how to bring those people into citizenship is something we should do because of our broken system. But nobody's for. This is the rhetoric that people use to make people afraid. Socialist, open borders. None of that's true. None of that's true. And the lies are used to make people afraid. So I'm just saying we need a good, decent, humane, legal immigration system. But the principle of treating stranger, the immigrant, well, is crucial to the gospel. So Donald Trump is demeaning and demonizing and threatens to deport millions of immigrants. And Jesus says, welcome the immigrants. That doesn't mean a policy of open borders. It's how you treat people. And so I think Donald Trump's policies, his use and abuse of immigrants, the fear and the hate, is literally a policy that is antithetical to the gospel of Jesus that I believe in. And people who believe that can have different views on how to make the system work. That's good. I work with both parties on making this system work. But we failed so far, and we just had a bill, as you know, that got put forward with a lot of conservative Republican shaping that Donald Trump killed because he wanted to run on the issue instead of solving it. This is a man who is not showing integrity on how to deal with issues. He rather invokes this fear, and that leads to hate, and that leads to violence. The violence in this country is growing, and that's because of the atmosphere that's been created by this Trumpian movement. So this isn't Republican. I always say, don't go left, don't go right, go deeper. So I don't have a left-wing solution. Left, right are binary categories that often don't fit the problem. How do we go deeper? And for me, that's going deeper into what my faith says. But for skeptics and people who aren't people of faith, it's what their conscience says, what their own
Jim,
moral convictions say.
you talk about the gospel, and clearly you're a man with a very coherent worldview. Are you skeptical about anything? Are there things that you're not sure about?
Oh, well, religion, some think it brings certainty, others think it brings reflection. I'm in that latter category. I'm not certain about everything. I have doubts. Uh, there's great mystery in faith, but this is for me. It's a pilgrimage. It's a journey trying to understand the world I live in because of the faith that I have, and so it's got to be tolerant and open. And uh, the prophet Micah says it well. He says, what does the Lord require of you? It says, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Now, I'm glad justice came first there, because I faith and justice. That's what my life.
What's your struggle, though? I mean, going back over the most influential Christians from Augustine to Pascal, there's always been this struggle. What's your struggle?
Well, the struggle I'm feeling now is we have a demagogue. That's
no. I take your point. You've already made that clear. What's your internal struggle, Jim?
Oh, I think what I'm going to preach tomorrow about is hope and how difficult that can be sometimes. And Desmond Tutu taught me my theology of hope. Really, he taught me the difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is often a feeling or a mood or even a personality type, cup half empty, cup half full. Desmond taught me that hope is not a feeling or a mood, it's a choice we make, a decision, because of this thing we call faith. The book of Hebrews says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And to me, my paraphrase of that is, hope means believing in spite of the evidence, and then watching the evidence change.
Is it
I'm
possible
not
that
always
your
optimistic.
faith might be wrong, though? Has that ever crossed your mind?
Well, you can believe in something with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and still retain humility. That you don't have all the answers. That you need to learn from other people of faith and people who don't have faith. We're in this together, and so uh, my struggle is some people think that the answer to bad religion is no religion. Um, I'll say, Andrew, there are some days when I feel that too, when religion gets so bad and so hateful and so hypocritical and so judgmental. But I think the answer to bad religion is better religion, better faith, truer faith. And that's a struggle that we're in. It's not just about politics, it's about what faith is supposed to do to our lives. And for example, you're an expert on digital internet matters. So to me, the big question is Jesus said, you'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Well, if you go deeper into that text, I think what he's saying is the opposite of truth isn't just lies, it's captivity. Freedom and truth are indivisible. And so I get worried about, like you, the internet. Uh, when the governor of Ohio says that's not true about Haitian immigrants not eating dogs and cats, the mayor of Springfield says the same thing. But then I see these interviews with people that are saying, well, I've seen it all over the internet. I mean, I'm worried about that. You're worried about that. Truth is crucial to the well-being of a society and freedom and democracy. And yet there's less and less accountability for what people say and what people do, especially online. There's all kinds of ugly things going on. And I've got pastors who tell me, I have my people 2 hours a week if I'm lucky, and yet the internet or Fox News has them 24/7. So what is the truth is not just a theoretical issue, it's very practical.
You've just given me the title for my new book, Jim. There's no social media in heaven. Is that fair?
Well, you have my sympathy on that.
Well, I'll get a blurb on the book. It's a real honor, Jim Wallis, a very famous writer, polemicist, professor. Wonderful new book, The False White Gospel, Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming True Faith and Refounding Democracy, a man who I think America should be most proud of. A real honor to have you on the show, Jim. We'll have to get you back after the election. We'll have to see what happens. I think everyone's holding their breath, but keep well, keep safe, Jim, and we'll talk to you in the not too distant future.
My wife says talk to as many Brits as you can, so I appreciated this time together.
Step on the scene, I'm ready to attack. Andrew Keene, yeah, he's the one to bash. Asking questions, no filter, just keeps on grinning. He is the man who's got the whole crowd spinning. Money, fame, success, it's all in his sight. He'll dig deep, expose you with all his might. No sugarcoating, he'll cut right through. Andrew Keene, he's the one to spew. Yeah, he's an expert.